My name is Richard Harlow and I am 71 years old. At my daughter's wedding, her fiancé decided to teach me a lesson. He called it a joke. I called it a declaration of war. He shoved my face into a $7,000 cake, white frosting, gold trim, 300 witnesses, and a silence so thick it could strangle. The taste of buttercream mixed with humiliation is something you never forget. The crowd gasped, then laughed. My daughter Sophie stood frozen in her wedding gown, eyes wide bouquet trembling in her hands. Her fiancé Ethan Whitmore smiled for the cameras, like a man who thought he had just made history. He didn't know the building we were standing in belonged to me. He didn't know the lights above him, the marble beneath his shoes, even the champagne in his glass, all of it was mine. He didn't know that behind this old suit, in quiet posture, stood the founder of Harlow Construction, a man who built half the skyline he was pretending to own. I didn't shout. I didn't strike back. I just looked around the room at the glittering chandeliers and the people applauding cruelty dressed as humor, and I understood something ancient. They had chosen the wrong man to humiliate. Before I tell you how I settled that debt, do one thing for me. If you believe that respect is earned, not bought hit-like, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to see how far a story about dignity can travel, because that night beneath the laughter and the gold and the noise, I made a promise. They thought they buried an old man in frosting, but what they did was wake the architect. The wedding was held at the Azure Ballroom, a cathedral of excess, where everything glittered but nothing felt real. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen tears. The air smelled of champagne and money. I stood alone near the back, a ghost in my own daughter's celebration. The suit I wore was 15 years old, pressed to perfection by my own hands. Nobody noticed me, and that was fine. I had spent years learning that invisibility was a kind of armor. Sophie moved through the room like a dream I once had, beautiful, distant, untouchable. Her smile was thin, practiced, the kind people wear when they know happiness must look convincing. I remember when that same smile used to come easy. Back then, her hands were small and sticky with ice cream, and she used to ride in the passenger seat of my old truck, singing off-key with her mother's laughter echoing from the back seat. That was before the world taught her that wealth could buy love and appearance was everything. Her fiancé, Ethan Whitmore, was born with the arrogance of old money and the desperation of new debt. His confidence was not built on competence, but on credit. I saw the calculation in his eyes from the first moment we met. He didn't look at Sophie the way a man looks at the woman he loves. He looked at her the way a broker studies a stock chart. A few months before the engagement, I tried to warn her. "Be careful who admires your reflection," I said. "Some people only love the mirror." She smiled politely and changed the subject. The distance between us had already begun. When her mother Helen died, I sold the mansion, the cars, the art, everything that smelled like a trophy. I kept one thing, our lakeside cabin, the house I built with my own hands when we had nothing but a dream and a box of nails. That cabin was her heartbeat carved into timber. It was meant to be our forever. Now it was my refuge. People thought I'd gone broke. I let them. Let them believe the empire had crumbled, that the name Harlow meant nothing but dust. In truth, I'd created a fortress called the Helen Harlow Legacy Trust, and within it slept the wealth of a lifetime, every building, every investment, every secret I'd ever built. The world saw an old man in flannel. I saw the safest disguise a rich man could wear. I wanted Sophie to learn the value of real things, hard work, decency, compassion. But Ethan saw an opportunity. The moment he realized I wasn't displaying my wealth, he decided to dig for it. He started small, expensive dinners, emergency trips, requests phrased as favors. Sophie repeated his words with that hopeful tone children use when they still want their parents' approval. "Dad, can you help us? It's just temporary." I gave her the money, not because I was blind, but because I wanted to see how far they'd go. I gave them rope, praying they'd climb. Instead, they started weaving a noose. Then came the meeting at the country club. Ethan, his mother Margaret, and Sophie sat across from me at a table polished so bright it reflected every lie in the room. They presented a wedding plan that cost $500,000 Scottish salmon, imported champagne doves, and a string quartet from Vienna. I offered something simpler, more meaningful, the Grand Majestic Hotel, a landmark I'd spent 3 years restoring. "It's my gift," I said, "a piece of my life's work for your new beginning." Margaret laughed. A small, sharp sound. "Oh, Richard, that's quaint. But we're aiming for something more exclusive. The word quaint landed like a knife. Then Ethan added, your hotel's old. We want something modern, fresh. The azure is the standard. They dismissed my legacy like a piece of outdated furniture. And when they slid an itemized suggestion list across the table, 40,000 for flowers, 30 for champagne, 25 for lighting, I understood what I truly was to them, not a father, not a man, but a wallet with a pulse. That night I sat by the lake under a sky full of stars. I remembered Helen's voice, steady and kind. Never build for applause, Richard. Build for the storm. The storm, I realized, had finally arrived, and I was ready to rebuild. A few weeks later, a thick manila envelope arrived by courier. The return address was a law firm I didn't recognize. It was addressed to Sophie, but sent to my house. My name written in her handwriting on the front, her trust, her innocence, made my hands tremble. I called her. It's from Ethan's lawyers, she said, her tone casual, almost bored. Go ahead and open it, Dad. I did. Inside was a prenuptial agreement printed on expensive paper that smelled of arrogance. I read every line slowly. I built a billion-dollar company. Legal jargon doesn't scare me. Halfway down page 3, I found it. Section C, subsection 4. In the event of divorce, Ethan Whitmore shall be entitled to 50% of any and all gifts, inheritances, or windfalls received by Sophie Harlow during the course of marriage. My blood turned to ice. He wasn't protecting his wealth. He was preparing to raid my grave. I called Sophie again, voice steady but hard. You can't sign this, I said. It's not a prenup. It's a trap. She hesitated. Then came the words that broke me. Ethan told me you'd say that. I closed my eyes. Sophie, he's planning for my death. No, Dad. You're wrong. You always think people are after your money. Her voice turned sharp, unfamiliar. You don't trust anyone. This is about love, not finances. The line went dead. I sat there at the kitchen table, the same one Helen and I built from raw oak, listening to the dial tone hum like a funeral hymn. The paper trembled in my hand. I realized Ethan had already won half the battle. He had turned my daughter's heart into his weapon. A few days later, they arrived unannounced. Ethan, immaculate as ever, surveyed my modest home like a real estate agent inspecting a teardown. Sophie stood behind him, smaller, somehow eyes darting. Nice place, Pops, Ethan said, running his fingers along the stone fireplace. Rustic, kind of a museum vibe. We'd brighten this up a bit. White marble, open concept, maybe a wine fridge here. I didn't answer. He strolled into my study, brushing the dust from the spines of books older than him. This room has potential. A gym, maybe Peloton in the corner, new flooring. Get some real energy flowing, Sophie murmured. That's an idea, but her voice was barely there. Then he said it. After the wedding, we'll be a little tight with expenses. We were thinking, maybe we move in here for a while, just to help you out. Help me out. The words echoed like a bad joke. And don't worry, he continued smoothly. Mom has a friend at a beautiful retirement community. Golden Meadows. Country club vibe. You'd love it. Golf, fresh air, people your age. You'd be comfortable there. That's when I finally looked at him. Really looked. He didn't see a man. He saw a liability he was preparing to relocate. My home, my memories, my wife's laughter still soaked into the walls. He wanted to gut it all. Bleach it clean, live in the hollowed-out shell of my life. I said nothing. Words would have been too small. When they left, Sophie kissed my cheek, hesitant, trembling. He means well, she whispered. I could smell the perfume she wore when she was a teenager, the one Helen used to buy her every Christmas. For a moment, I saw my daughter again. Then the door closed and she was gone. The following week, I was invited to the rehearsal dinner, a restaurant called Aperture, the kind where the portions are microscopic, but the bill could feed a family for a month. Ethan had booked a private room, white walls, gray glass, sharp corners. Cold, a perfect stage for cruelty. I was seated at the far end of the table, Ethan at the head, glowing under soft light, talking about investments. Golf games with senators and yachts. Margaret Whitmore. His mother nodded in rhythmic pride, her pearls flashing with every agreement. Sophie laughed at the right moments, but her eyes were tired. Halfway through dinner, Ethan lifted his glass. "You can't just rest on old achievements," he said loudly, smirking at me. "You have to keep building." Forward momentum, pops. Laughter rippled down the table. I didn't respond. I just held his gaze and took another sip of wine. My silence was deliberate. Then he tapped his glass again for attention. "A little story about my future father-in-law," he announced. "It'll make you laugh." I knew what was coming. He told them about the time I helped him change a flat tire. Only in his version I was incompetent, fumbling a joke. He mimed the gestures, exaggerated the struggle, called me a raccoon covered in grease. The room exploded with laughter. Sophie clapped, weakly, eyes wet. When it ended, I didn't move. I just stared at him until he looked away. That silence he didn't understand. It was not defeat. It was design. Then, as if humiliation wasn't enough, he raised his glass again. "Sophie and I have been worried about Richard, all alone out there by the lake. We want him to be safe. So as a gift, we've arranged for him to move into Golden Meadows after the honeymoon." Isn't that thoughtful applause? Genuine, cheerful applause. Even his mother dabbed fake tears. But Sophie didn't clap. Her eyes were fixed on the table, her shoulders trembling. That was the moment something inside me broke, not with noise but with precision. The loving father died, the builder remained. I went home that night in silence. The road blurred beneath the headlights. Inside my study, I sat behind the same desk where I'd signed contracts that shaped skylines. The room was dark, but my mind was clear. I reached for the old telephone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Clara Vaughn answered after 2 rings. "Clara," I said quietly. "It's time." Her voice was calm. "You're activating the sunset protocol, yes." "No hesitation." "Understood, Mr. Harlow. I'll begin at dawn." I hung up. The sound of the receiver landing on the cradle echoed through the room like thunder. They thought they'd evicted me from my own life. They didn't know I'd been preparing for this storm for a decade. Tomorrow the ground beneath their perfect world would start to crack. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't need to. When clarity finally arrives, it burns hotter than anger. It keeps you awake not with rage but with purpose. I sat in my study watching the reflection of moonlight ripple across the lake outside. The water was calm. I wasn't. The sunset protocol wasn't some spur-of-the-moment act of revenge. It was something I designed years ago after Helen died. Back then, I saw too many men my age lose everything not to bad luck, but to their own blood. Greedy children, manipulative spouses, lawyers with shark smiles. I promised myself our legacy would never become a feeding ground for vultures. So I built what I understood best to structure, a blueprint. A system that would protect our life's work long after I was gone. Clara Vaughn, my attorney for more than 3 decades, helped me build it. Together, we buried the truth under layers of trusts, holding companies, and legal shells. Harlow Construction remained my public face, but every true asset, every share, every building, every dollar was quietly absorbed into the Helen Harlow Legacy Trust. From the outside, I looked like a man who had sold everything and retired into modest obscurity. From the inside, I controlled an empire that no one could touch. It was the perfect camouflage, an old man by the lake, living on a stipend, fishing at dawn, reading books by firelight. Let the world underestimate me. Let them think the fortune was gone. The protocol had 3 principles. First, insulation. Make sure no one, not even family, could trace the true flow of ownership. Every asset sat behind a wall of paper and law. Second, observation. Live simply. Watch how people treat you when they think you have nothing. Third, activation. If the day ever came when someone tried to destroy what I built, the entire mechanism would come alive. It would not just protect the legacy, it would expose the guilty. That night, I triggered all 3. While I sat in silence, Clara's team began the work. Forensic accountants dove into the Whitmore family holdings accounts. Private investigators, former federal agents, began digging through Ethan's business history, his debts, his side deals, his secrets. Every document, every loan, every fabricated story of old money was being compiled into a single devastating file. I didn't do this out of vengeance. Revenge is emotional and emotion is sloppy. This was preservation, a correction of architectural proportions. At 3 in the morning, I stepped outside. The air was sharp and clean. Across the lake, the first trace of dawn painted the horizon gray. I thought of Helen, of the way she used to rest her head on my shoulder and whisper, "Build things that last, Richard, not walls, but meaning." She was gone, but her voice still guided the blueprint. I turned back toward the cabin. On my desk lay a photograph of Sophie at age 6 wearing my hard hat, her cheeks smudged with dust. She used to tell everyone she'd be an architect like her dad. Somewhere along the way, she traded blueprints for handbags. But I still believed there was something good left in her, something buried under layers of glitter and fear. The next morning, Clara called. "It's worse than we thought," she said. "The Whitmores are drowning in debt. Their family company's been losing money for 5 years. They've mortgaged everything, 3 estates, their art collection, even their jewelry. They need your daughter's inheritance just to survive." I felt a strange peace hearing it. "Truth has a cleansing quality." "Proceed," I said. "Understood," she replied. By noon, Jack Carter, my oldest friend, former rival, and the man whose voice had thundered through that ballroom, was on the phone. He sounded half amused, half furious. "You should have told me earlier, Richard. That boy's a parasite. His family's reputation's thinner than champagne bubbles." "You want me at the wedding?" "Yes," I said. "Front row. And what do you need me to do? Stand up when I give you the signal. Remind them who built the ground beneath their feet." Jack chuckled, that gravelly sound only a lifetime of cigar smoke can produce. "It would be my pleasure." We hung up. For a moment, I let the quiet settle again. The plan was in motion, but there was no satisfaction in it. What comes after betrayal isn't triumph. It's the slow rebuilding of self-respect. The kind you construct brick by brick in silence. That afternoon, I walked down to the dock. My old truck sat nearby, paint fading dented from decades of work. Inside, the dashboard still carried the small scratch Helen made when she dropped her wedding ring. I ran my fingers along it and smiled faintly. She'd called it our lucky scar. The lake was still. My reflection looked back at me, older, yes, but steady. The man staring out wasn't broken. He was rebuilt. For years, I thought patience was the ultimate form of strength, but patience without boundaries is submission. That night at the rehearsal dinner, they mistook my silence for weakness. Tomorrow they would learn the truth. Silence can also be the sound of planning. The Sunset Protocol was alive now, humming beneath the surface like an engine. Lawyers, investigators, and allies were already aligning the pieces. By tomorrow's ceremony, every card would be in place. The Whitmores believed they'd cornered an old man. What they didn't realize was that the entire board had been mine from the start. And when the first move was made, when the room was full and the cameras rolled, I would simply reveal the blueprint. No shouting, no threats, just truth, cold, undeniable, and absolute. That was always my favorite part of construction, the moment the dust cleared and everyone finally saw what had been built in silence. The next afternoon, the city gleamed beneath a glass sky. The azure ballroom shimmered with gold light, a monument to vanity. Guests flooded in, wearing confidence like perfume. They didn't know they were stepping into a stage I had designed, every chandelier, every inch of marble, every inch of power, already mine. The ceremony passed in a blur. I watched Sophie walk down the aisle, her smile trembling at the edges. Ethan Whitmore stood tall, basking in his performance. Cameras flashed. Applause filled the room. A perfect illusion. Then came the reception, the real theater. The speeches began. Toasts about love, family, and legacy. Words that sounded heavy but meant nothing. My turn came and went quietly. A few heartfelt lines, a nod to Helen, and I stepped aside. The room clapped politely, already forgetting me. Then Ethan took the microphone. He started with charm anecdotes, jokes that smoothed salesman's rhythm. Then came the poison wrapped in laughter. He told the story of my flat tire fiasco, the same lie he'd used at the rehearsal dinner. Each exaggeration drew louder laughter. Guests leaned forward, eager for more. Margaret Whitmore smiled, radiant in her triumph. I said nothing. My stillness was deliberate. Silence has gravity when wielded by someone who knows how to build it. Ethan ended his story with a mock toast to Richard Harlow, proof that it's never too late to learn something new, even if it takes a little help. The room erupted again, but before the echo faded, a voice cut through the noise. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" The words hit the air like thunder. Jack Carter rose from his chair, his face carved in fury. "You just insulted the man who built the city's bones." 100 heads turned. Ethan blinked, confused. Then Jack pointed straight at me. That man you just mocked, he's Richard Harlow, founder of Harlow Construction. He doesn't just own a few buildings, you idiot. He owns this building. The laughter died instantly. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cameras stopped recording mid-pan. Ethan's smile faltered. He tried to laugh. A joke, come on, Jack. But my friend didn't blink. No joke. You've just spent an hour ridiculing the man whose company designed the ground beneath your feet. The silence that followed was a vacuum, and into that vacuum truth began to pour. I stood slow and deliberate. I pulled a white handkerchief from my pocket, Helen's, with her initials embroidered in blue. I wiped the last trace of frosting from my face, each motion deliberate, each second heavier than the last. When I straightened, my posture changed. The old man in the corner vanished. I looked at Ethan, and the fear in his eyes was all the confirmation I needed. Just then, the ballroom door swung open. The click of heels echoed across the marble. Clara Vaughn entered in a charcoal gray suit carrying a slim leather portfolio. Her presence was a scalpel, sharp, cold, precise. She walked down the aisle between tables without a word. The crowd parted for her like water. She stopped beside me and spoke, her voice steady and clear. Good evening. My name is Clara Vaughn, legal counsel for Mr. Richard Harlow. My apologies for the interruption. I have a few brief clarifications to present. The projector screen behind the cake flickered. The romantic slideshow of Ethan and Sophie vanished. In its place appeared a high-resolution legal document. The Azure Ballroom, ladies and gentlemen, Clara continued, is not owned by the Whitmore family, nor by any third-party vendor. It is a subsidiary of Helen Holdings, LLC, which in turn is wholly owned by the Helen Harlow Legacy Trust established by Mr. Harlow 10 years ago. Murmurs spread through the room. She tapped the document with a laser pointer. My name glowed at the bottom of the ownership line. In other words, she said calmly, every dollar spent tonight, from the imported champagne to the $7,000 cake currently decorating Mr. Harlow's lapel, was paid for by him. Someone audibly gasped. Clara turned toward Ethan. This event was a controlled environment, Mr. Whitmore. A test. To see what kind of man would mock humility while standing on another man's foundation. The screen changed again. Now a financial summary filled the wall. Whitmore Family Holdings consolidated balance sheet. Lines of red numbers. Debt loans, defaults. Clara's voice sharpened. As of this week, the Whitmore family carries $27 million in active debt. 3 properties mortgaged, 1 line of credit, frozen, multiple pending suits. The only asset of value left was your fiancé's future inheritance. Margaret Whitmore gasped, clutching her pearls as the crowd turned toward her. Her husband lowered his head, shame bending his spine. Clara stepped closer to Ethan. You weren't marrying love, Mr. Whitmore. You were attempting a corporate bailout. Then came the final blow. The screen changed one last time, a copy of the prenuptial agreement stamped across in bold red letters, void. 2 reasons, Clara said. First, under state law, this contract is unenforceable. Due to fraudulent misrepresentation, you concealed your family's insolvency. Second, the assets you targeted don't exist. Mr. Harlow's estate is protected by irrevocable trust. Even his home, the one you plan to renovate, has already been donated upon his passing to the Children's Hospital as part of the Helen Harlow Memorial Fund. She paused. There is no inheritance. There is no house. The vault you tried to open has been empty all along. The ballroom fell deathly still. Ethan's face drained of color. He tried to speak, but no words came. His mother fainted. The guests whispered like rustling paper. I stepped forward. My voice was quiet, almost kind. You see, Ethan, you thought you were marrying wealth. You were standing on an illusion. You mocked the man who built it, forgetting the first rule of architecture foundations. Remember everything. I turned to Sophie. Her hands covered her face. Tears slipped between her fingers. She couldn't look at me. This man never loved you, I said softly. He loved what he thought you were worth. That's what greed does. It replaces love with calculation. She sobbed silently. I looked at Clara. Make sure every staff member here tonight, every waiter, every valet receives double pay. Then transfer the remaining budget to the Helen Harlow Memorial Fund. She nodded once, and with that I walked out. No applause, no vengeance. Just the quiet click of my shoes against marble, the sound of dignity returning to its rightful owner. Outside, Jack Carter joined me. The cool night air wrapped around us. "You just demolished an empire," he said, smiling faintly. "No," I replied. "I just rebuilt one." Behind us, the ballroom erupted into chaos. Reporters, guests, family, friends, they didn't know whether to leave quietly or stay and witness the ruin. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The structure had already collapsed. As Jack Carter and I stepped into the night, the warm air of the city hit like a benediction. I could finally breathe again. For months, I'd been walking through fog, grief, disappointment, betrayal. Now everything was clear, stripped to the bones. Jack exhaled a long breath. "That, my friend," he said, "was cleaner than any demolition I've ever seen." I smiled faintly. "It wasn't demolition, Jack. It was restoration." We stood by the curb as the valet brought his car around. The distant noise of shouting guests carried through the glass doors. I could almost picture it, Ethan Whitmore, pale as chalk, trying to claw back his dignity with shaking hands. Margaret crumpled on the floor. The entire Whitmore name, once whispered like old royalty, turning to dust in real time. Inside that golden cage, their empire had been exposed for what it really was, a hollow framework of lies built on borrowed pride. "Do you think he'll recover from this?" Jack asked. "No," I said. "Men like him don't rebuild. They only consume. Once the illusion is gone, they starve." He nodded slowly. "And Sophie?" That question lingered. For a moment, I didn't answer. The truth was heavy. "She'll have to find herself again," I said finally. "But this time, she'll do it without his shadow over her." We drove in silence back toward the lake. The city lights reflected in the windshield like constellations. Jack dropped me off at my cabin just as dawn began to pale the horizon. I watched his taillights disappear down the road. Then I turned to face the house. The same cedar beams, the same stone fireplace, the same window where Helen used to wave as I came home from the job site. For the first time in years, I didn't feel lonely. I felt anchored. The following morning, headlines spread like wildfire. Whitmore family humiliated at lavish wedding scandal. Bride's father exposes groom's fraud in shocking public reveal. Billionaire philanthropist Richard Harlow donates entire wedding budget to Children's Hospital. I didn't read them. Clara did. She called sounding pleased. "Public opinion's on your side," she said. "The hospital received the transfer. They're naming the new pediatric wing after Helen." For a long time, I said nothing. Then good. That's the only name that ever mattered. By evening, the Whitmore holdings were in freefall. Bankers withdrew credit. Partners cut ties. Every skeleton my investigators had uncovered, unpaid taxes, shell accounts, false valuations, hit the media within 48 hours. Their reputation disintegrated faster than their finances. Ethan tried to fight back, of course. He sent his lawyers after me, threatening defamation suits. But Clara was already 3 moves ahead. She filed countersuits citing fraud, coercion, and breach of contract. Within a week, his legal team withdrew quietly. They knew the ground they stood on was already gone. 2 months later, I received an envelope in the mail, handwritten, trembling. It was from Sophie. "Dad, I don't know how to begin. Everything you warned me about was true. Ethan is gone. He left the country. Margaret blames me for the scandal. I've lost friends, money, my place in that world. But maybe I needed to lose it. I've been volunteering at the Children's Hospital, the one named after Mom. I see her everywhere there. I'm trying to learn who I am again. I hope someday you can forgive me." I folded the letter carefully and placed it beside Helen's photo. Forgiveness wasn't something I could give on command, but the fact she'd found her way back to meaning, that was enough for now. Time passed. The Whitmores sold their estates quietly to pay their debts. Their name, once a currency, became a warning whispered at fundraisers. Don't be a Whitmore. As for me, life returned to silence, the kind I understood. Mornings on the porch with black coffee, evenings by the fire rereading Helen's old letters. The lake stayed the same. So did I. Sometimes I thought about Ethan. I wondered what corner of the world he'd fled to, what lies he was spinning now. But then I remembered something Helen once said. "You don't have to chase justice, Richard. Just build it strong enough and it will stand on its own." That's what the Sunset Protocol was. Justice built to last. One late afternoon, while trimming the garden, I heard footsteps on the gravel path. I turned and there she was, Sophie. She looked thinner, older, but softer too. The layers of performance were gone. She stood there clutching her purse like a child holding a secret. "Hi, Dad." I set down the shears. "Hi, Sophie." For a moment, neither of us moved. The silence between us wasn't cold, it was fragile. She stepped forward, eyes glistening. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. I nodded. "I know." She looked around at the garden, the lake, the porch. "I didn't realize how much of Mom is still here." "She never left," I said. We sat on the steps. She told me about the hospital, about the children, about how she'd started studying architecture again. "I want to build something good," she said quietly. "You will," I replied, "but build it from the inside first." As the sun lowered behind the trees, the water turned gold, the same color as the ballroom lights months ago, but gentler, honest. "I used to think love was about patience," I said, "but I learned it's also about boundaries. You can love someone completely and still stop them from destroying themselves or you." Sophie nodded, tears spilling freely now. "I know that now. We didn't hug, we didn't need to. Forgiveness doesn't always make noise. Sometimes it just sits beside you quiet and steady while the world repairs itself." When she left that evening, I stayed on the porch, coffee cooling in my hands, the lake glowing like a mirror. The war was over. Not because I'd won, but because I'd rebuilt what mattered. True strength isn't in silence alone. It's in knowing when to break it. It's been 6 months since the wedding that never truly happened. The invitations still sit unopened in drawers across the city, souvenirs of a night people whisper about in half-embarrassed fascination. They call it the Harlow affair. Some think I orchestrated it for revenge. They're wrong. It wasn't revenge. It was correction, an act of architectural mercy. You don't rebuild on a rotten foundation. You clear the ground first. The paper stopped calling weeks ago. The Whitmores vanished from the social pages. Their empire was liquidated, their penthouse sold to a foreign investor, their name erased from the donor walls they once worshipped. Their downfall became legend told over cocktails by men who feared they might be next. But I don't take pleasure in it. The older I get, the more I understand that humiliation is just another form of decay. The only thing that matters now is peace. And peace, I've learned, has a sound. It's the creak of a wooden porch at sunrise, the whisper of water against stone, the clink of a coffee mug against old oak. Each morning I sit outside the cabin Helen and I built and watch the lake turn to gold. The wind carries her laughter sometimes, or maybe it's just memory pretending to be kind. I like to believe she would have approved of how everything ended. She always hated arrogance, but she believed in redemption. Sophie visits on weekends now. She brings her sketches, small, simple designs for playgrounds and community gardens. Nothing grand, nothing meant for applause. She says she wants to build things that make people breathe easier. I think that's her way of saying thank you. I don't need the words. Seeing her work with her hands again, seeing dirt on her palms instead of diamonds is enough. Once in a while, we drive into the city together. The Helen Harlow pediatric wing is almost finished. She helped design it. The first time we walked through the construction site, she stopped in the middle of the main hall, sunlight falling through the open framework, and said softly, "I can feel her here." I didn't answer. I couldn't. When you spend your life building towers, you think permanence comes from steel and concrete, but it doesn't. It comes from moments like that, from the living proof that something good survived you. At night when the house is quiet and the lake is still, I think back to that evening in the ballroom. The cake, the laughter, the silence that followed. People often ask if they ever get close enough how I stayed so calm. The answer is simple. I learned long ago that anger is loud and power is quiet. The man who yells has already lost. The man who waits controls the room. That's what the Sunset Protocol was always about, not wealth, not revenge, but sovereignty. The ability to protect what matters without begging the world for fairness. To build walls high enough that greed can't climb them, and doors that open only to decency. One afternoon, Jack Carter came by for coffee. He looked around the cabin and shook his head. "You could live in any mansion you want, Richard." "Why stay here?" I smiled. "Because this house doesn't lie to me." He laughed quietly. "Fair enough." Then after a pause, "You know you could have destroyed him completely." "I already did," I said. just not the way he expected. Jack nodded. And Sophie? She's learning to build again. That's all I ever wanted. He raised his cup in a small salute. Then the blueprint held. After he left, I stood by the water, watching the last light fade behind the trees. For a long time, I listened to the frogs, the wind, the faint echo of the world turning. People think strength is how much you can carry, how long you can endure. But endurance without purpose is just slow surrender. Real strength is knowing when to draw a line, when to say enough, when to defend the dignity that others mistake for weakness. That night I opened my old drafting book, the one Helen gave me when we were young. The first page had her handwriting in blue ink. Build something beautiful, even out of what's broken. I closed the book, smiled, and whispered to the empty room I did Helen. I finally did. The story of Richard Harlow ends where it began, in silence. Not the silence of defeat, but the kind that follows after justice has spoken and peace has settled into the cracks. Because in the end, the loudest revenge is a quiet life rebuilt with honor.